People always expect celebrity stories to start with something dramatic, like betrayal or addiction or a messy divorce. But sometimes the most revealing moments are actually the quiet ones that look insignificant until everyone starts obsessing over them. That's why this whole Selena Gomez situation caught my attention, because on paper it sounds almost silly, but the more you sit with it, the more it says about how these women are navigating fame, pressure, and boundaries in completely different ways. There was this blind item floating around saying an A-list singer, actress, producer showed up to an event for exactly 4 minutes and 32 seconds. And the part that really gets me isn't even the timing itself, it's the fact that someone bothered to time it at all, like they were waiting with a stopwatch just to confirm what they already assumed. That level of surveillance is honestly exhausting to think about, but at the same time, I kind of get the instinct behind it, because we've all been there in our own way, showing up somewhere out of obligation, smiling, making sure we're seen, and then mentally counting the seconds until we can leave and go back to our own space. The difference is, when normal people do that, no one writes a headline about it. When Selena Gomez does it, it turns into a whole narrative about what it means, who it affects, and whether it's a sign of something bigger. Of course, the internet immediately turned it into jokes, with people saying she only had 4 minutes to save the world, or that the contract said 5 minutes and she's now in trouble. And while those comments are funny, they also highlight how little grace celebrities are given when they choose comfort or boundaries over performance. This all ties back to her showing up briefly at a screening for Amanda Seyfried's film, and realistically, no one actually believes Selena sat through the entire movie in that time, but that was never the point. Her being there was symbolic, supportive, and very intentional. And honestly, that kind of presence matters more than quietly sitting in the dark for 2 hours just to meet some imaginary expectation. The photos from the event became their own mini spectacle too, with people zooming in on Selena and Amanda's faces, overanalyzing their expressions, joking about sour candy, gum, or whatever else they imagined was happening in that split second. And meanwhile, both women looked fine, happy even, which somehow still isn't enough for people who want something deeper to dissect. What I found more interesting was Selena's own response afterward, when she praised the film, hyped the performances, congratulated the team, and then circled back to correct a spelling mistake because she said she gets weird about that stuff. That tiny detail says so much more about her than any blind item ever could, because it shows someone who still cares about how she presents herself, who wants to be accurate, thoughtful, and respectful, even in a space where she could easily say nothing at all. And just when that moment seemed like it would stay small and contained, the conversation swerved, as it always does, toward Taylor Swift. Because somehow, Taylor is never far from any Selena discussion, especially when it comes to friendship, loyalty, and life milestones. There's been a lot of chatter lately about Taylor's wedding plans and how secretive everything is, to the point where even people you'd assume would be fully in the loop are apparently being kept at arm's length, and that includes Selena. For years, their friendship has been treated like this untouchable gold standard, the kind people point to and say, see, real friendships do exist in Hollywood, so naturally there's this assumption that they're completely involved in each other's biggest moments. People still talk about how carefully Selena's wedding was arranged to accommodate Taylor, from security to privacy to making sure she was comfortable, so the expectation became that Taylor would mirror that same energy back. But according to sources, that's not exactly what's happening, because Taylor is allegedly keeping almost everyone in the dark, not just about surface details like the dress or flowers, but about the actual date, time, and location of the ceremony. The explanation being offered is that Taylor wants total control, no leaks, no early scoops, no surprise headlines, and honestly, considering how her life has played out in the public eye, that makes a lot of sense. What complicates things is another report suggesting that Selena has actually said no to Taylor in a way that Taylor didn't expect, specifically when it comes to being part of the bridal party. According to insiders, Taylor asked Selena multiple times to be a bridesmaid, and Selena politely declined each time, explaining that she didn't want to pull focus away from Taylor on her wedding day. Whether you agree with that reasoning or not, it's hard to ignore the self-awareness behind it, because Selena knows better than anyone how headlines work, how cameras linger, how her mere presence can become a storyline even when she's trying to stay in the background. What makes this especially interesting is that Taylor herself gave a speech at Selena's wedding and was very visibly involved. So on the surface, it might seem uneven or confusing, but when you look closer, it feels less like imbalance and more like two people responding differently to where they are in life right now. Selena is newly married, coming off years of intense personal growth, health struggles, and public scrutiny, and it feels like she's in a phase where protecting her peace isn't just a preference, it's a necessity. Taylor, on the other hand, is planning a wedding that the world is already desperate to infiltrate, dissect, and narrate for her. So her instinct is to lock everything down, control every detail, and treat the whole thing like a classified operation. In that context, Selena saying no doesn't automatically signal distance or tension, even if it reportedly surprised Taylor. Sometimes saying no is actually the most honest form of love, especially in long friendships where roles and expectations have quietly solidified over time. People don't talk enough about how difficult it is to renegotiate those dynamics without hurting feelings, because when you've always shown up in a certain way, changing that pattern can feel like rejection, even when it isn't. The internet, of course, isn't interested in nuance, so a 4-minute appearance becomes evidence of disengagement, a declined bridesmaid role becomes proof of a rift, and a private wedding becomes a symbol of exclusion, when in reality, all of these moments could simply reflect maturity. What really stands out to me is how women like Selena and Taylor are constantly expected to perform closeness in ways that men rarely are, as if their friendships need to be visible, loud, and perfectly reciprocal to be considered real. If Selena had forced herself to stay longer at that screening, no one would have praised her for endurance, they would have just moved on to the next thing. If she had agreed to be a bridesmaid despite feeling uneasy about it, people would have applauded the optics without considering the emotional cost. And if Taylor had shared every wedding detail publicly, the same people demanding transparency would have turned around and criticized her for overexposure. There's no winning in that system, which is why these small acts of boundary setting feel more significant than they first appear. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, it feels less like a story about friendship strain and more like a story about evolution, about two women who have grown up under a microscope learning how to choose themselves without completely losing each other. Growth is uncomfortable, especially when it disrupts narratives people have grown attached to, but it doesn't automatically mean something is broken. Sometimes it just means things are changing shape. Selena showing up briefly instead of overextending herself, Taylor guarding her wedding instead of turning it into a spectacle, Selena saying no even when yes would have been easier, all of that points to a level of self-respect that doesn't always translate cleanly in headlines. And maybe that's the real tension people are picking up on, not conflict between friends, but the discomfort of watching women stop performing versions of themselves that made everyone else comfortable. When you look at it that way, the 4 minutes, the NDAs, the declined invitations, none of it feels scandalous, it just feels human. It feels like adulthood, like recalibration, like learning that support doesn't always look the same in every season, and that love doesn't disappear just because it becomes quieter. In an industry that thrives on excess, visibility, and constant access, choosing restraint might actually be the boldest move either of them can make, even if it leaves people confused, speculating, or reaching for stopwatches.